Hey friends, today I'm going to be showing you how to draw this absolutely adorable Arctic bunny. All you're going to need for this drawing is a sheet of white paper and a black crayon. So let's get started. Now make sure you follow along, especially with these first steps where we set up where to draw it on your paper, because if you don't, you will run out of room for his ears. So the first thing I need to do is I actually need to measure down from the top of my paper to make sure I have enough room for his ears. So I'm gonna use my whole hand, just like this, not the one holding the crown, my opposite hand. I'm gonna put my fingers together and I'm gonna turn my whole hand sideways. Line it up with the edge of your paper, and then you're gonna make a little mark right underneath your thumb like that. That's gonna leave a whole hand worth of space at the top of my paper. Make sure you do this step. Now that I have this little mark, I'm ready to draw his head. We're gonna make his head in a circle shape, but we're not gonna connect it at the bottom. We're gonna leave it open. So when I make this, I'm gonna start on my mark that I made, and I'm gonna make a nice big curve going out to the left, stop when I get to the bottom, and then I'm gonna come back up to the top, and I'm gonna make a nice big curve on the right, stop when I get to the bottom. So important to leave this open as I continue my drawing. Now, we're gonna go ahead and jump back up to the top, and we'll go ahead and get those ears on there. His ears are gonna be really big. They're gonna start at the top of the head, and they're gonna go out kind of on a diagonal towards the corner. So I'm gonna have this line that goes out, 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 all the way to the corner, and then I'm gonna bring it back in, back to the top of his head. If you want to add the inside of his ear, you can do that. Another long line. I like to make it kind of skinny in there. And then here, same thing. I'm going to go out towards the corner and then bring it back in. And see how I've used all of that space for his ears? That's why it's so important to make that mark the first step. All right, now we're going to continue down making the rest of his body. So wherever this circle ended, this is where we're gonna start his body. His body is gonna go from the corner of his head. It's gonna come all the way to the bottom edge of your paper. And we want him to look like he's sitting down. So his body needs to be a little bit wider than his head. This is important. If you don't make his body wider than his head, let's say your head looks like this, and you make his body look like this, super skinny, gonna look really strange. We're gonna make sure we make it a little bit wider. So I'm gonna start here, and my line's gonna curve out and away to make it wider than his head. Same thing on this side. I'm gonna curve my line out and away to make it look wider. That makes him look like he's kind of squatting down, sitting. Then we're gonna add his feet at the bottom here. So I'm just gonna add one big curve on this side, and then two little lines for his toes. And same thing on this side. Try to make his 2 feet symmetrical. Remember, that means the same on both sides. So I'm gonna go ahead and make those 2 feet. Before I jump back up and work on his face, I'm also gonna add a tail. You want his tail to be somewhere down here near the bottom of his body. Not up here near his head, that would be weird, but somewhere down here. If you have more space on one side of your paper than the other, you can put it on the side that has more space. So I actually have more space on this side. I'm just gonna make a nice big fluffy tail. I'm gonna make it as big as I can with the space that I have, just like that. Now, we're gonna jump back up to his face. Our rabbit has a snout, and a snout is the part of the face that sticks out, and the nose and the mouth are gonna be on top of it. So I'm not drawing a nose or a mouth this time, I'm drawing a snout. And the snout's gonna be kind of a triangle shape. So it's gonna start with a flat side around the top, and I'm starting about halfway down his head. So if we look here, it's about halfway. So it's gonna be flat here, and then it's gonna angle down to make that triangle shape. But we do wanna give it kind of a curve. So it's gonna come down and curve on this side. Okay, again, that's not his nose. That would be a really big nose. On top of this is where we're gonna put the nose. So I'm gonna make a smaller triangle shape with the flat part at the top. I can go ahead and fill that in because that's his nose. And then his mouth is gonna sit underneath that. So this is the snout, and then there's his nose and his mouth. Now his eyes are actually gonna sit just kind of above his snout. So right here, I'm gonna draw one nice big eyeball. You can make any style of eyeball that you want, but I'm gonna go ahead and just make a little reflection and then fill it in. And I'll do the same thing on the other side. Again, try to make the two sides symmetrical. We did a lot of symmetry on our last project. All right, there it is. All right, now we've completed the shape of our bunny rabbit. Now the last part is gonna be to add texture, because even though this is an Arctic hare that lives in the Arctic and is white, we still know that he has fur all over his body. So we're gonna make some lines to show that he has fur. We call these texture lines or texture marks. So in his ear here, I'm gonna go ahead and add just a bunch of little lines to create texture. I'm not coloring him in because he's not black, he's white. But we use these lines to show that he has texture, or he has fur. So I'm gonna give him a bunch of texture marks on his ears. I'm not gonna put fur all over his whole face, but I kind of like it when he has the fur in between his eyes here, kind of on the top of his snout. So I'm gonna add a little bit of fur going up, away from his snout. Kind of outlines his eyeballs. And then maybe even some coming down the side of his face. You can put fur over the entire bunny rabbit if you want to, but I kind of like to put it just kind of around the edges. Remember, we're not going to color him because he's supposed to be white, but we do want to add just a little bit of texture there. And since he's got such a fluffy tail, I think I might add some kind of lines and textures, just kind of swirls in here to make it look like his tail is a little fluffy. You don't have to do that if you don't like it, but I just added some in there. All right, our last step on our rabbit is going to be to cut him out. Now, this is a pretty simple shape to cut out, but it gets a little bit tricky, kind of down here at his tail and maybe a little bit on his head. So I'm gonna show you a couple of tricks for working on this. The first thing is when I'm cutting a really sharp corner like this, I'm gonna cut in from one side. I'm gonna stop and take my scissors out. And then I'm gonna turn my paper and I'm gonna cut in from the other side. And what that's gonna do is it's gonna let that piece just kind of fall right out instead of trying to turn the paper with the scissors in there. Now, the rest of this on here is pretty easy, so I'm gonna go ahead and cut this part out. Remember to turn your paper and not your scissors. Your scissors should always point away from you. Now, sometimes these little scraps end up getting kind of in the way. So a lot of times when I'm cutting something, I might actually just go ahead and add an extra cut and I'll get rid of that piece and move it over into my trash pile. Make sure you keep a trash pile so it doesn't end up on the floor. That's gonna allow me to keep working and that won't be in my way. I might even get rid of this piece too. Let it just fall. Now, at the top of his head, that gets a little bit tricky. So what I'm gonna do here is I'm actually gonna cut in from one side of this ear, take my scissors out, come over to the other ear, cut all the way into the top of his head, and then that's gonna allow me to kind of move this piece and just snip it off. Makes it really easy to get rid of that piece that was between his ears. And then I just keep going. All right, friends, that is our Arctic hare all drawn and cut out. He is ready for the final step, which is gluing to our landscape pictures.